here to talk about these three terms that you probably have heard quite often, especially here. But gamification, crowdsourcing, big data. Are they at a convergence point is what I've actually been trying to look at over the past couple of years. And I think we maybe need to understand a little bit what is a convergence point. Now, a convergence point is basically a point of no return, where once you enter that point, basically you can't go back to how things were before. You probably don't know how we're going to go forward from here. You can go multiple paths, but you definitely cannot go back. And we see that in the way we consume media, for example, today. When we used to consume, the way we used to see TV, for example, has changed, and we now use multiple devices to see the same content. That puts a lot of pressure on content providers, like who have to actually make sure that the end user experience is basically the same, because we as users are not going to settle for anything less. All content has to be the same, irrespective of the platform you consume the content from. So that's a convergence point at media. So how are we reaching this convergence point in this area here? I think it makes some sense to actually go back to a little bit to definitions. If you think about crowdsourcing, we know the general definition, which is then in Wikipedia, is you basically get a lot of tasks done from a crowd, usually online. And Wikipedia is itself a crowdsourced website. People put content voluntarily. But I also like the definition that crowdsourcing can actually be viewed as harnessing the crowd or the potential of the crowd to solve complex problems at scales and rates that no one individual can. So that's basically, I think that's actually a much more specific and better definition. So now let's look at the definition of gamification. So for those of you who haven't heard of gamification before, it is the process of adding games or game-like elements to something as a task to encourage participation. Now that's the general definition. But what are these game elements or game-like elements? Well, I won't go through the whole gamut of them. There are more than 100 of such elements, but just to show you a few of them. We have, for example, badges that actually tell us where we are, where we have reached at a game. We have leaderboards that basically tell you how you are performing near your peers. What are the levels of difficulty, for example, you could access? Points, everyone knows points because you always get points for doing something. Then there's always rules. Games always have some kind of rules, that framework, that frame the setting that you're in. Narratives that tend to drive the process. An acknowledgement of your performance in the game, and that can be through medals or many other mechanisms. And you also tend to have a lot of active feedback that's going on, real-time feedback. And these are just a few of all of these game elements that basically can be used in also non-game contexts. So if I now take the industry definition of gamification, that actually can be seen as the use of game thinking and game mechanics in non-game contexts to engage users in solving problems, right? So now you can probably see the correlation between crowdsourcing and gamification in terms of trying to solve complex problems. And I think the shorter definition here is actually about a game. Game is actually nothing but a set of problems to solve, as Guy said in 2010. But these are not just simple problems. These are actually complex problems that gamers solve. Now, this is, for example, a screenshot from a widely played game, online game. These are known as MMORPGs, or multiplayer, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. And these basically have a lot of characters, and these are avatars which players can take on. And as they play, they basically have here a challenge in front of them, and that's to slay this monster here. But in doing so, they actually have to look at the information dashboard that they have to have. They have a lot of stuff that's going on here. They have the map in which they are interacting with each other. There's a live chat that's going on that indicates their health and the magic levels, their character strengths, the potions that they have activated, those that they have not activated, the other weapons that they can access. A lot of this is happening in split milliseconds. And they make these decisions in milliseconds and do it in a collaborative manner, because if they collaborate, they can actually beat this monster, right? And if you beat the monster, you get more rewards, and that's how you progress in the game. So this is basically complex problem solving in milliseconds. Now, if we take this further, what this results in is that it results in engaged and engrossed users, right? And this is, of course, what companies would like to tap into, which is why gamification started becoming popular since 2010. And from 2013 onwards, we were seeing a lot of initiatives that was trying to say, how can we get our employees to basically do their task like this boy here, right? And that's a very challenging task, I must say. So, but I need to make a small difference here, that you need to see the difference between games and gamification, right? So you can also just design games for just pure entertainment. A lot of people might have heard or played Super Mario, for example, just pure entertainment. But gamification can use serious games where you develop a game for a single particular purpose, or you just use game elements without the context of a game. For example, the LinkedIn progress bar is basically a game mechanic that actually encourages you to make sure that you fill in your profile. And you will do that because this progress bar keeps telling you that you are now getting there, right? So that's just a very simple way to show game mechanic enforcement. So, and a lot of companies have actually been able to use this very clearly, and they have done this to sort of grow users and customer bases. These are some of the very successful companies who have basically grown a lot of user bases. And of course, Foursquare was one of the first ones to get into the bus, which is why you can actually see that they have more than 20 million users at the moment. Another favorite of mine is Duolingo, which I think is a very good example of both the combination of crowdsourcing and gamification, because here, not only do they engage users, but you actually learn a language at the same time. But when in doing so, you're actually helping, the crowd is actually helping Duolingo translate documents at the same time. So this is, for example, what you can also use games for. But games can also have negative game mechanics. Now, a negative game mechanic in this case is, for example, what I like to call here resource scarcity. Now, this you probably have heard about Black Friday, and Black Friday basically is very similar to a lot of game mechanics that you see in some games, even a very popular game like Candy Crush, for example, where you create an artificial resource scarcity to make people run for it, for example. And this is what makes this, of course, a negative tactic, but a tactic nevertheless. So, but games don't just use negative, they use both negative and positive tactics, and let's also see some of the positive ones. So it can be used to solve societal challenges, as I've listed here with quite a few examples. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you an idea, Pain Squad, which is actually one of my favorite, it was run in Toronto in Canada, and they've recently expanded. They basically started targeting children with cancer to fill in their pain journals. Now, filling in pain journals for children suffering with cancer is a very hard task. And if the children don't do it on a daily basis, the journal is basically useless to the physician. So how could you engage the child who basically is tired and sick to fill in a pain journal? How much pain do you feel? When do you feel? Etc. So they thought, okay, let's do it with gamification. But it wasn't just giving them points and medals. They actually built a story around it, and they allowed them to actually gain a sense of purpose, because you actually joined what is called Pain Squad. And Pain Squad was basically a police force that had to take on the enemy, and the enemy here was cancer. So, and you would graduate, and you would start from a novice, and your aim was to, of course, become a chief. And there was real-time videos that were integrated in it. And in a way, it became so successful that even the physicians were surprised how the children were actually maintaining 100% completion rates of their pain journals. Similarly, another simple example called Free Rice teaches you to improve your English vocabulary. But at the same time, when you play this game and you sort of, every time you get a right answer and you learn more English, the World Food Program basically donates rice to the World Food Program. So this is basically another way of gamification and crowdsourcing coming together. So a lot of these examples are basically already suggesting to us that gamification and crowdsourcing are really coming together in one way or another. There are overlaps, there are clashes, there's resistance, there's even maybe a convergence of some sort. So these are two really paradigms that basically both are merging in a way, and the boundary lines are basically blurring. However, if we go back a little bit to the past, and I love this curve because this is a curve that I think the Gartner consultancy in the US uses very, very, very often. It basically is called the Gartner hype curve, and it has 5 phases. It's known as a technology trigger, a positive and a negative hype phase that can result in a peak of inflated expectations or a trough of disillusionment. And basically, as people get better at using the technology, then it's slope of enlightenment, and you can eventually reach a plateau of productivity. However, this is when you reach the trough of disillusionment, it's also dangerous because if it doesn't overcome this, it can actually die out, and some technologies do die out. And Gartner has been very good at actually predicting some of these technology triggers. Now, if you look at actually July 2012, Gartner predicted at that time, and the data scientists basically clubbed gamification, big data, and crowdsourcing very close to each other on the hype curve. So these were 3 things that were going on a positive hype. So you have positive hype here and negative hype over here. What has happened since, by 2015, is that gamification is now lying somewhere here. So if you actually look up by December 2015 what's happened, gamification is somewhere here, big data is still somewhere up here. And the reason that this is that a lot of these things basically sometimes do not live up to the hype. And I think that's what actually happened with gamification. So Gartner also made a prediction that 80% of all gamification interventions will fail to meet business objectives. And this was in 2014, and a more recent study in late 2015 actually showed that almost 70% of workers are not engaged in their jobs, even when gamification initiatives have been applied. There is diminished creativity and problem solving, a very counterintuitive measure here, in 8 out of 9 tasks across 3 examined tasks. And what they found was that higher incentives, and these are game incentives, led to worse performance. And there was fatigue and boredom, and at the end of an 18-month trial period, participation rates at companies using gamification dropped by 50%. Now, a little bit drop is normal, but a 50% drop in participation rates is quite scary. And this actually tells us that, well, there was some hype around gamification. So another very well-used example is this example from Sweden, what is known as the speed camera lottery. Now, the speed camera lottery basically tries, okay, what if a portion of the money collected from speeders went into a lottery for law-abiding citizens? A nice gamification example, and it was actually successful in the pilot that they ran, and speed rates actually dropped by almost 25% in the areas that they tested in. But why don't we see more examples of this around us today? And I think that's because if you introduce the speed camera lottery to the UK, we can actually see that this petition here actually only has gained 9 supporters. So gamification is generally a big task. We also have gamification and crowdsourcing. If you look at Google Trends, they have basically been coming together, and the way that they're coming together is something that is very clear. But I think what basically dwarfs this is how big data is basically 10 times more, trending much more. And I'm not surprised with this, because the reason is that, as someone else has already also mentioned, is that we are actually at an era of connectivity. By 2020, it's predicted that we are going to be 4 billion connected people, sort of dealing with about 50 trillion gigabytes of data. And when we are doing this, we can either ride this wave or we can drown in it. So if I think about it, I think citizen science basically gives us a very good example of how we can go forward with this. Now, citizen science examples, like, for example, Foldit, tells us what we can do with solving problems for mankind. And we at Aarhus University have done the same, where we have created a game to help actually build a faster quantum computer. You just play this game, but at the back of this, there are calculations that are helping us about what are the calculations needed for building this quantum computer. So whereas the user only plays the game. So this is another way of crowdsourcing and gamification coming together, and big data as well. So, and just to very briefly show these kind of top lists, the purpose here actually overcomes the cash. Is you have another platform called Innocentive, where you get some cash for solving tasks. And this is a crowdsourced website, but these people get cash rewards, whereas here they actually get, they just get fame, or they're just wanting to do something for humanity. And the top person here is basically a carpenter who has no idea of protein science, but is able to solve puzzles. That actually helps the scientists. So, and I think one of the best examples here in the UK is from Cancer Research UK. And they basically have made a lot of games. And these 3 games here, for example, are one of the top ones that basically have really combined and made this into an art. And I think this is where we need to be heading towards. And I'm going to end here with a very short video, which talks about what citizen science can do in this area. Can you please play the video?
We are pioneers. As technology progresses,
we embrace it, while others play it safe.
We play to cure. We made it possible.
For everyone.
For everyone.
For everyone.
To join the fight against cancer.
So I think that's where we're ending at. And I think I would like to end, this is my last slide, that basically says that we are not actually ending up with convergence, but I think what we're ending up is a big bang event where there's going to be opportunity, heartache, and wisdom. And I think the next cure for cancer is going to come out of this from the crowd. And that's what is the future that I really look forward to. Thank you.
Amen to that.